احنا اليوم في صدد الوقت حوار مع شبابين المحتوى نزلنا من كل البرامج اللي أرمز ودار العلمي تحت مظلة السيدة والبس. Out of the strategy, we have speakers who are from Imperial based in the victors. Imperial with us, government says to Europe business. So on behalf of the foundation and Story Foundation with Wilderness and Sciences, I would like to welcome everyone to the daily session. It's more about speaker events that's in high the find of our portfolios and we are delighted to be hosted today with the Kuwait Economic Society. It's a pleasure to be here and it's a pleasure to be hosted. I think it's a great collaboration where we actually start to bring about more exposure for solidarity and actually has our societies, especially in fields of economy and fields of global growth industry. And at the beginning, I would like to welcome Imperial College. Their key partners for our different programs that we provide through EFAS. Today, we are delighted to have Professor Kevin Corley. Professor Kevin Corley is a professor of Organisational Behaviour at the Management and Psychology Department of the Imperial College. He also is a co-director of the Imperial College Centre for Leadership and the director of the PhD program in the school. Professor Corley obtained his PhD from Pennsylvania State University. He will take us today through the presentation that we have today on the topic of leading a world combined with stability. I would say you are in safe hands, and I think he will take you through a beautiful journey, 45 minutes, 1 hour. We'll keep the questions at the end if you have any questions, please will ask at the end of the session. Without further ado, I'll give you the opportunity to start this.
City. I'll just take this 2 minutes for you for the start of connected. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أبدأ speaking عربي. أصلاً بدأ تابعكم الله. إحنا سعيدين صراحة بالتقول سعيد بالتقول رئيس كوريس اللقاء رئيس اللجنة كان رئيس جمعية الاقتصادية لفترة طويلة المدير السابق وكان هو في كيكاس وصراحة نشكر كيكاس على هذا التعاون إن شاء الله نبدأ خير وياكم. أنتوا تأكلوا الزمن الأكاديمي والجمعية الاقتصادية قيادة رئيس مشاركة جديد. احنا عندنا ليبر ماركت عرضنا او سوق العمل بحيث ننقل الخبره مالت الاكاديميه الى سوق العمل، الهدف الحقيقي اللي هو تكون في عائد على المجتمع وتكون في عائد على سوق العمل، وهذا اللي احنا نتكلم. بهذه الطريقه ان شاء الله نقدر نفهم في جولتنا في المجلس. سعيد في لكتشر كاسس هو بروفيسور في Organisational في اوكلاند and المؤسسي تحاول في تدريب العالم تنظيم المؤسسي في التنظيم المؤسسي ولكن دعنا ننظيم رياضي فسمعنا أن التدريب وكان جدا سوي. Thank you so much for coming here over. I think it made me very interesting. I'm going to interview you for sure. So the floor is yours and you can move and input.
Okay. So then we're such a long time. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. This is my first visit to Kuwait, and it's a wonderful honor. So, all of us are honored to be here. So excited. What I'd like to talk about is this idea of leadership, this idea of influencing those around us, especially in organizations, in such a way that we can bring about positive effects and can start to move our organizations in a direction that they need in order to achieve their goals. And what is somewhat unique about the conversation I'm going to have with you tonight about leadership is that we are dealing with leadership that needs to be done. There's, that there's a lot going on in the world. The world is coming off of a global pandemic. There's lots of political instability around the world. Organizations are beginning to recognize that this is a unique time on the world. And that what's happening globally is beginning to have an impact within inside the organizations that you work in. So surveys are beginning to show increased anxiety amongst employees, higher levels of dissatisfaction amongst employees, and leaders and managers are beginning to feel the pain around that dissatisfaction. And perhaps most important for our conversation tonight is the idea that as change initiatives, what organizations are trying to do with inside their employee groups, inside their strategic boundaries, they're finding it very difficult to bring about the type of change to move their organization in the direction it needs to go. Right? So it's within that context that we begin to ask the question, what is this notion of hybrid instability? And it's a bit of an academic definition. I'll throw it out there and we can help about it. But hybrid instability involves when the level and the pace of unexpected change, so not change that we plan, but unexpected change, is such that the anxiety that naturally comes along with change almost becomes overwhelming. All right, especially for the individuals who are going through that change. And the typical approach is to deal with those anxieties or no longer working. Okay? So we're really focused not so much on the organization itself, but on the individuals inside the organization, because it's those individuals who ultimately are being asked to do the organization's action, right? To put the organization's strategy into play and to move the organization where it needs to go. So as these individuals begin to feel the anxiety that comes along with change and becomes overwhelming, that's when we start to reach this level of higher instability. So there's 4 conditions that generally are recognized as involving or invoking hyper instability. So when the pace of change exceeds the capacity to process that change, right? So when change is happening so fast that it's difficult for us to make sense of it, it's difficult for us to put those changes in the context of the world that we understand. That's the first condition. The second condition is when those changes occur and they don't fit the patterns of change that we're used to. Right? Change is not new. This is something the organization's always dealt with. It's something that's employees have had to deal with for as long as they've been in an organization. But when the change begins to occur in such a way that we can't recognize what that change is, that adds a level of anxiety. The third condition is when those actions that are needed to respond to the change begin to exceed the resources that are available. So if we begin to understand the change, and we begin to see ways in which we might act with that change, but we're unable to do that because of resources, whether they're financial resources, whether they're tangible resources, or maybe perhaps they're cognitive resources, like we as individuals can, then it becomes, we're moving up towards that level of just being not hyper instability. Now, the final condition is a really important one, where the ambiguity becomes the norm. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this notion of ambiguity, because I think it's a key to understanding what's going on, not only in the world right now, but also in our organizations.
Professor?
Yes,
Can you further explain what's navigability?
I can. I'm going to go there right now. I think it'll make more sense on this slide. So I'm an academic, and I was a consultant before that, so I love a 2x2. Here's a 2x2. I've got 4 quadrants up here, okay? When we begin to think about change in the context in which leaders function, one of the things that we can look at is how much we understand about the situation that we're currently in. Okay, so you have a nice continuum here of we don't understand very much, we understand a lot. The other axis over here is how well can you predict the results of your actions? Okay, so in the upper category up there with that plus sign, what that would suggest is I know that when I act, these things are likely to happen. Like I can predict how my actions are going to be received or what type of effect they're going to have. Obviously down here, the negative side, I don't understand. how my actions are going to impact the situation. So with those two conditions laid out, we have these nice four boxes that we can look at. The first is this condition called volatility. So we know a lot about the situation, and we can predict the result of our actions pretty well, but there's still a lot going on. It's very volatile. Okay? But it's a type of volatility that we can make sense of and work around. If we lose our understanding of the situation, okay, but we still have a good sense of what our actions are going to do, we call that complexity. Okay? Now, there's a lot of volatility and complexity in the world right now, as I was suggesting. But what I'm going to argue is that it's actually these bottom two quadrants that begin to cause more difficulty for leaders. Okay? So let's look at this first condition over here, what we call uncertainty. So we don't understand how our actions are going to are going to play out, what the results of those actions are going to be. But we have some sense of the type of situation that we're dealing with. Right? This is understandable. It's recognizable. Okay? That's very different than this final quadrant here in Behaviour, where not only do we not know much about the situation, but we also don't understand how our actions are going to impact that situation. So as I suggested, well, first of all, so if you put the first letter of these words together, you get something called a VUCA model, which sounds very strange, V-U-C-A, but trust me, it's quite fun to say. You probably find yourself saying it quite a bit now, because but this VUCA model has become a way for leaders to begin to lay out the context in which they're looking at. And as I suggested, these bottom two quadrants that we really need to be looking at and understanding the world that leaders are facing like that. So let's dive into this just a little bit. What do we mean by uncertainty? Let's dive into this idea of uncertainty. What uncertainty involves is confusion arising from a lack of specific information, right? So remember, we understand the type of situation that it is, but we don't necessarily understand how our actions are going to impact that. Okay? So uncertainty arises when we don't understand, we're uncertain, right, about what's going on. We recognize the situation, but we're uncertain what type of situation, and maybe how difficult or the intensity of the situation. Let me give you an example. A puzzle. Most of us think we put together puzzles, and they're still branded or as adults. We know that we're looking at puzzle pieces, right? And if we recently bought the puzzle from a store, we even have a picture on the box of what the completed puzzle is supposed to look like. But what we don't know is how the individual pieces go together, right? But there's some uncertainty about how all those pieces will ultimately fit together to create that picture that the puzzle represents. We can also talk about this in terms of it being an intent problem. So I'm originally from Colorado, in the United States, and a favorite pastime of many people in Colorado is to go to the beautiful mountains and go camping. Okay, and when you go camping, often you bring a tent with you. For any of you who have ever experienced this, putting together a tent is one of the least fun things to do in the world. But it's also highly uncertain, right? Especially if it's a new tent, right? I know that this pile of material and sticks in front of me, I know it's a tent. I'm not exactly sure how I put things together to create the shelter that I'm going to sleep in tonight, right? So there's a sense of understanding, but there's still a lot of uncertainty about that. And in scientific realms, the event that is used is mass casualty incidents. So some sort of incident where multiple people are injured. So perhaps a big car accident or a shooting or something like that. We know what it looks like, but until we get the details of what happened and who was injured, we're still uncertain about how bad the situation was. What we know about uncertainty is that uncertain situations are solved by seeking out more information and more data. If we can find the right data that will remove the uncertainty of the situation, we know we can move forward. It's this type of tent, and it involves these 8 pieces going together. It's this type of incident involving these number of people with these types of injuries. Okay? So, in many ways, the organizations that we have created and that we mostly are familiar with today, they are built to deal with uncertainties. So organizations, for the most part, are really good at gathering data and processing it, right? And thus helping managers and leaders remove uncertainty from the situation and know how to move forward with it. We good?
Right.
Good, okay. Let's talk about ambiguity. The ambiguity is something very, very different. So, in an ambiguous situation, the confusion arises because there's too many possible interpretations. It's not that we don't know, we lack the information for what this situation is. Ironically, in this situation, there's too many different things it could be. Right? That the possibilities are sometimes even limitless. Right? And when we talk about the examples, I'll bring up the COVID pandemic. At least where I lived back in March of 2020, there were so many different things that this disease could have been, right? And the impact that it had, so many different interpretations. We didn't know where to go, right? Some people refer to these as explorer problems. So unlike the tent, and we know what it is, we just don't know how to put it together, think about an explorer entering the new lands for the first time. What are we going to experience? Are there deserts? Are there jungles? Are there friendly people here? Are they unfriendly? Are there animals that will try to eat us? Are there animals that will not? There's just so many possibilities here. But the ambiguity that we have to work through can cause us to not be as effective in our decision making and our communication, whatever that is. So, what's important from the recognition about this is that ambiguous situations have to be solved differently than in certain situations. It's not a matter of seeking out more data. Because if there's too many possible interpretations, what's going to happen if we start loading more data onto ourselves? Yeah. The confusion is going to rise. And then again, thinking back to where I was living in March of 2020, there was lots of data coming out, lots of information. You know? Was any of it helpful? No. Did any of it actually help us understand what was ahead of us? No. So, in ambiguous situations, we solve these through sense-making processes of trying to interpret what's going on around us and make sense, sometimes even possibly in creative ways, to understand what it is that we're dealing with. And it can actually be made worse, like I said, with more data, hiding data.
Maybe give an example. What do you mean of making more sense? Give me an example. Yeah.
So, sense making refers to.
So now I have let's say 10 data, and all of them make sense.
Okay.
So how are we going to choose from those 10? We were at 100 and we came down to 10.
Okay.
So how am I going to choose from those 10?
And we don't have any criteria to understand how those 10 differ from each other or which one might be more helpful. So sense making suggests that we have to go out and we have to collect a different type of data. It's not a matter of bringing lots of quantitative survey data in or something like that. We have to go and talk to people.
Yeah. Can we rephrase it and say that what makes even more sense to my situation?
Yes. Yes, we have to begin to connect with the type of information that will help us determine what it is that we're looking at here, right? What is this land that is in front of me as an explorer, right? What is this disease that we're dealing with, right? And how is it affecting me? So there's a instead of simply taking the data we have and analyzing it and processing it with uncertain situations, we have to go and create new data that we might not even know that we need yet. Does that make sense?
Game on.
Excellent. So, when we look at these two, what is important to understand from a leadership standpoint is that ambiguity is going to have much greater impact on the potential for change than uncertainty will. And let me explain why that is. So, from psychology research, we know we have a pretty good sense of when behavioral change will happen. Okay? It looks like a mathematical formula, but it's not, trust me. There'll be no math to talk about that. So on the left-hand side, we have this idea of dissatisfaction with the status quo, right? So the way things are right now, I don't like, I'm not happy. If my dissatisfaction with the status quo begins to rise, then it's more likely that I'm going to be willing to change my behavior. Because I don't like where I'm at right now, I want something different. Now, if you add on to that a desirable future state, right? So you tell me that if I change my behavior, I'm going to experience something new, something that seems like it's more desirable for me. If we're able to combine those two things, we're increasing our chances of behavioral change. Okay? What's important to understand is that it's all in relationship to the cost of change. Well, if I actually do this change that you want me to do, if I change my behavior in this way, what's it going to cost me? Okay. Now, these aren't financial costs, not necessarily. When we think about the cost of change, this can include stuff like power. So, I have lots of power right now. I look at the future state that you want me to go to. I'm not going to have such power here. That's a cost, right? And these are the costs I'm willing to give up. Competence, right? In the status quo, I feel pretty confident. I understand what's going on, I'm very confident. You want me to move over to this new desirable thing? I don't feel I'm going to be as confident. I would be as confident in my behavior. We can talk about relationships. The relationships I value, they're going to change. I can talk about the rewards, whether they're financial rewards or other types of rewards. I understand what I'm being rewarded for right now. In that desire, say, I might not. One that we often don't think a lot about, but it's very powerful, is identity. I understand who I am right now. I am this type of engineer. I do this type of work. You want me to change? I'm not sure about my me. Well, I can still be an engineer. I mean, call myself that, right? So when we have change situations where those costs of change are quite high for an individual, we're unlikely to see behavioral change, right? So when this equation works out in the favor of leaders, where the dissatisfaction with status quo is high, the desirability of the future state is high, and in combination of things are greater than the perceived costs of change, or likely to see evil change. When it doesn't work out with this one that works in the other way, we're unlikely to see change. So how does the ambiguity affect this? It's a great question, right? So we've got this ambiguity around the future. We're in a situation, it's very ambiguous, we're not sure what we're dealing with, and therefore the future is very fuzzy to us, right? Well, immediately, that desirability of the future state comes into question. As an individual, I'm much less likely to agree with my leader that the future is a place I ought to be. And the negative side, I don't look that way, right? And you're having difficulty explaining it to me as a leader. It also increases the cost of change, or at least the perceived cost of change. I'm less likely in an individual situation to see power, competence, relationship, reward, whatever they happen to be. I'm less likely to see those things in a positive way. I'm much more likely to see the costs increase. And even indirectly, ambiguity about the future can impact the way that I would be at the status quo, right? And it can actually make me feel more comfortable where I'm at and decrease my dissatisfaction.
Excuse me.
Yes?
The previous size, it should have no multi-equation.
Will I share the slides?
Yes.
Yeah.
The previous slide. The equation if the theater that increases, the cost can be created as students. Did I understand?
It's a little hard to hear you.
زي ما عندك في سؤال إذا عم تسألي إزاي عشان بعد Okay. Keep going with the سؤال. We're going to continue and we're going to answer presentation later after that presentation. So we want to interrupt the.
We can come back to this.
Yes, we can come back to this.
That's fine. So, as a leader, if I'm trying to bring about change inside the organization, I'm trying to get my followers to change their behavior, change the way that they are doing their work. And I've got this ambiguity about what we're dealing with and what the future holds. I can pretty much count on there being less change and less likelihood of peace change, which suggests that as leaders, one of the things we really have to focus on is that ambiguity and what we can do to begin to remove that ambiguity. So, this obviously suggests a need for very definitive leadership. In the face of that ambiguity-driven instability, a couple things I have to do as a leader. First, I have to find a way to cope with that ambiguity. Not only just for myself, because it's ambiguous for me as well, because now I'm a leader. There's nothing special about gains, right? But I also have to understand that ambiguity in such a way that I can foster progress, that I can keep my people moving forward, right? Because the more set in the ways that they are, the less they feel about positive about moving forward and progressing, the less I'm going to be able to do what I need to do. So that's the first thing that we have to do. Second, I have to find a way to begin to develop some resilience in my followers, and to help them not only cope with the ambiguity, but to become somewhat resilient to it. Because when there is ambiguity in the situation, it doesn't disappear right away. It's likely to linger. And even if we begin to deal with that ambiguity, there's likely more ambiguity around that method. So if there's anything that I can do to begin to build the resilience of my followers and get them open to change, that's what will help me as a leader in that organization. Finally, we have to start removing the barriers to adaptability. Okay? The more adaptive that we are as an organization, the more likely we are able to continue moving forward and progressing. Okay? So this suggests a couple of key things that we as leaders really have to focus on. And I want to take just a little bit of time and talk about those in three general buckets. The self, so me as a leader, what I have to do, my individual followers, and then the group of the organization as a whole, okay, and then what we need to do. So let's start with the self, this idea of leading the self. First of all, leadership starts with a mindset. And for many leaders, this idea of leading in hyper-instability, but there's lots of ambiguity around, it's going to require a change in mindset. That obviously we have to learn to be comfortable with ambiguity. We have to feel like we can recognize ambiguity and uncertainty, because obviously there's things we can invent. But recognize that when we find ourselves in an ambiguous situation, there are ways forward. There are things that we can do to continue the progress. Many leaders, it's foreign from them to deal with any ambiguous situation. They begin to freeze up, they begin to question their decision making, they become less confident in how they're interacting with their followers. So part of what we need to do with leaders is to become more trainable in those situations. We have to open ourselves up to new perspectives, because we know in an ambiguous situation, old solutions aren't going to do it for us. Right? We're going to need to think differently if we want to work ourselves out of this ambiguous situation, which means I myself as a leader have to be open to new perspectives. That might mean new ways of leading, it might mean new ways of understanding my followers, it might mean new ways of trying to understand the environment around them. Willingness to experiment and learn, those go hand in hand. Experimenting leads to the F word, failure. A lot of organizations don't like to talk about failure. Right? But that's what experimenting is about. Experimenting is not, it doesn't work well if you're a perfectionist. Right? And so we have to experiment, potentially go and learn from it. That's the key. Right? Learn from what happened in that experiment. Use that learning to move forward. And then the final thing I would suggest that's needed in this mindset, this idea of a purpose-driven leadership. Many leaders are simply lead because they were told to lead. Or many team leaders are leading simply because that's part of the job description. Oh, I'm vice president now, I guess I'm going to lead. Right? And what I would suggest is that leaders who are not driven by a purpose behind their leadership will struggle with times of anger and irritability. That we have to have a guiding purpose to our leadership. And whatever it happens to be, there needs to be something that we can continue to point to, right? When the going is tough, when the experiments aren't working and there's lots of failure. There has to be something that we can point to and say, okay, that's not working for us. That's why I'm doing this, right? Without that, it's going to be a struggle. Now, mindset isn't just enough. It has to be a skill set shift as well. I was just on a flight over here. For those of you who have flown on airplanes before, you know the announcement. A change of air pressure in the cabin, the masks go cut from the ceiling. And then they said, make sure to put on your own mask before helping someone else. Anyway, all that works for leaders as well. You have to take care of yourself before you can begin to take care of others. In these ambiguous situations, stress can be very high. Anxiety can be very high. If you're not taking care of your own stress, if you're not taking care of your own mental health, it's going to be very difficult for you to help others, right? So it's very interesting if you look at the leading experts now talking about high-performing leadership, almost every single one of them will mention get good sleep, try to exercise, maintain a healthy diet. What's that have to do with leadership? Well, it has to do with leadership because you're taking care of yourself, right? Which will give you the energy to be able to take care of others. Practicing empathy. We have to be able to put ourselves in other people's shoes in order to understand what they're experiencing in order to begin to help move them forward, right? Now, empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy is something different. And what I suggest is you have to sympathize with your followers. That sympathy is much more about feeling the same emotions that they feel, right? Empathy is simply understanding what they're going through.
Understand their feelings.
It could be their feelings, it could be their thoughts, it could be the experiences that they're having. Yes.
Understanding them.
Yes.
Rather than feeling what they feel.
Exactly. So we're not suggesting you have to go all the way to sympathy and share the same emotions and thoughts that they're having. But we don't want to ignore them either, right? So that's where empathy comes in, being able to connect. Exercising non-linear thinking goes along very well with the experiencing and being open to learning. So thinking in different ways, not thinking in a linear way. And the final one I would suggest is expanding our scope of influence. Now, scope of influence is a fairly old concept in leadership. It's been out for a long time. Basically, it's within inside a group of people, how many of those people can you actually influence? If you've asked them to do something, how many of them are going to say, well, stuff. So in organizations, oftentimes this involves hierarchical levels or moving laterally position. And what I would suggest is that in times of hyper instability, it's even more important than usual to be expanding your scope of influence, getting more and more people willing to listen to you, getting more and more people who might be willing to consider changing because you are asked them to work or you've made an argument that can change. So expanding your scope of influence is always important for leaders, but in these times I suggest it's even more important because we can't always count on the leader next to us or above us to be taking the steps that we're taking in this type of leadership. So that's the focus on the self. Let's talk about followers real quick. We have to find a way to maintain that attitude, right? And to find a way to focus them on the certain needs that are irreparable. Okay? Now, in some situations, maintaining that attitude might simply be, I know this sounds kind of counterintuitive, but not communicating with your followers about how bad you really are. I'm not suggesting that you need to lie. I'm not suggesting that you need to withhold the truth. But what I'm suggesting is that as leaders, we often come into information and understandings that the rest of the organization doesn't. simply turning around and saying, oh wow, things are really bad, and might not be the best situation. They're under best stress to do. So some of this is finding ways to let that ambiguous context seep its way into them and not overwhelm, right? And sometimes that means holding something back about someone else and finding the right way to frame it in communities.
Because that will lead to increasing the chaos and abuse.
Exactly. If you just let them all through.
It will even make the situation even worse.
Right. So transparency is important. I'm a firm believer in transparency or being
You
open.
don't have to be transparent 100%.
And not all the time.
Not all the time.
At the same time,
Yes.
right? So it's a matter of being smart about that.
Yes.
Reward learning. So it's about not just focusing on short-term results, allowing freedom to explore and even fail. So it's one thing for ourselves to understand it and accept. We have to observe, we have to learn from it. It's the other people to feel comfortable with that as well. And oftentimes they look to their leaders. All right, it's okay for me to try something different. Yeah, I'll try something different here. Right? Well, what happens if it doesn't work out? I would expect it to work out. But we need to know whether this is going to have an effect, whether this is going down. So try it, right? And it's that short-term thinking that often gets us stuck there. Ambiguous situations are not dealt with by thinking short-term. You have to think to the long-term, right? The COVID pandemic was not resolved by thinking about tomorrow or thinking about the next week. It was resolved thinking about where are you going to be, where do we need to be 6 months from now and years from now, right? So getting always thinking about that long term. Developing leadership capacity around us. So encouraging others to take on leadership when the opportunities make sense. If there's one thing that we are beginning to understand a lot about this period of hyper-instability is that no one leader can solve everything. We need as many leaders as possible.
Come together in order to do something.
Exactly that. So when there are opportunities to let others around you take on leadership experiences, responsibilities, yes, do it, right? Because you might have a gem right there, someone who can really help in this situation, who can help move the organization where it needs to go, and you don't even know it until you give them a chance. Right? Which is counterintuitive for a lot of leaders because it's, I'm now in power and I need to hold on to that, right? And I need to do one who's micromanaging and controlling. But in these times of ambiguity, the more you let go, the more you bring other people into the leadership around, the better off the organizations may be. And then finally, encouraging independent judgment while nurturing shared responsibility. So this is the balance, right? It is not an easy balance to find. It's going to involve some of that experimentation and funding from it. But it's how do we get people to think for themselves? How do we get people to explore things that they think are worth exploring while still nurturing this idea that we're in this together? Right? We're not a bunch of individuals who are trying to reach this goal or work through this difficult time. We're all in this together, but yeah, it would be great if you didn't. You had this idea, go follow it, go explore it, right? Because that might be the thing that we need in this out of this situation. So it's a delicate balance. It's a balance that many leaders have been trying to do for quite some time. But I would suggest that during these times of hyper-instability, it's even more important for us to find kind of balance. And then finally, let's talk about the group and the organization level. So we need to protect those collectively. We need to protect those leadership voices from below. So resisting the urge to silence alternative perspectives. And this is something that we're trying to work into the culture of the organization. Right? We're trying to make this the norm for how behavior happens inside the organization. So doing it with one follower, that's one thing. But encouraging this across your group or across the organization, that's a different level of leadership that is one that we need. Building with hybrid thinkers. What I mean by hybrid is these multidisciplinary perspectives, right? In times of ambiguity where we don't even understand the situation that we're in, homogeneous thinking is not going to help us. If everyone is thinking the same way, everyone has the same background, it's not going to help us. If we can get that multidisciplinary thing, right? This person's coming from this angle, this person's coming from that angle. We're more likely to find a way out. We're more likely to find something that will begin to make sense to us and allow us to progress forward. This is a challenging one, encouraging people to name the elephant in the room. I'm hoping this metaphor translates. The elephant in the room, does that make sense?
Yeah, the elephant in the room.
That big giant thing that we know is there, but we don't want to talk about? Yeah.
Taboo.
Taboo could be a taboo, but yeah, certainly something that is difficult to talk about. We need to talk about those types of things, because if we can't talk about them, then we don't understand if that elephant in the room is part of us holding us back. That elephant in the room might be the thing that prevents us from taking on a new perspective and be that much impact, right? The problem is that oftentimes naming the elephant in the room involves something about the behavior, right? I'm going to speak about
that. Makes it even harder.
Yeah, I know, I understand. But oftentimes we have to be open to the fact that perhaps this thing that no one really wants to talk about, but we need to talk about, involves us. And that gets back to the self, being able to change our mindsets, and being able to think differently about what it means to lead. And then the final thing I'll mention is seeking out these social and political barriers of adaptability. That these things that are baked into our normal ways of behaving within an organization. We have to seek those out. There are usually things that are holding us back from being adaptive and being very comfortable in the status quo. And if we're not willing to go and look for them, if we're not willing to be open to finding them and dealing with them, it's going to be very difficult for us as an organization to progress. How am I doing on time?
You're just on time.
Excellent. So, what I suggest then is that what we're dealing with is a very clear call for leadership, the way of thinking about leadership, right? Albert Einstein supposedly said, although historians they did actually say this, but it's wonderful, and then we'll give them credit nonetheless, that we cannot solve our problems with the same thing that we used when we created them. Now, he said that a long time ago, and he said it in the context of the efforts to create the atomic bomb in World War II, right? And he was very worried about the effect that would have on society. But I think it still resonates with us today, that we can't expect these new, complex, well-sort of ambiguous situations that we're dealing with to be solved with our old solutions. These are new problems. All solutions aren't going to work, but that suggests that it needs to be type of leadership as well, right? Abraham Lincoln, Peter Drucker, who was a management philosopher, the most reliable way to predict the future is to create it. And I think that is so empowering to think about as a leader. I don't know what the future holds. It's ambiguous, it's scary, it's a big dark spot out there. But if I feel like I can begin to create the future, then I have some empowerment. I have some sense that my actions are going to take us where we need to go, right? It's a big, unknown black spot out there, but that suggests perhaps there really isn't anything there yet. And if we take certain actions, if we move forward in certain ways, we can create what's in that spot, so that by the time we get there, it's something that we can deal with. It's something that we can take advantage of and actually move forward in the organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the time, Professor. I think we're going to continue. We're going to open for a couple of questions, so we'll leave you on Friday at 9. So there's a question here.
Wise. Ja, en ook voor de politieke bouw, voor onze sport, en voor de kampioenschap. Eens. Dat ding. Even.
Doing something who was in school saying,
Can you agree? We can shout then.
discussion.
Thanks. Adam, so thank you so much for this talk. Basically, I would like to know what you speak like is the main attitude in terms of leadership or even an organization that exists in terms of hybrid stability. This was probably word some things is like the current and just the thing of challenge, but these really long really deep that makes.
So it's a great question. Thank you for asking it. There's an interesting paradox about change leadership, and that is that oftentimes to get to the point in an organization where you have enough influence to lead change, you've had to work very hard at fitting into the culture and the norms of the organization. So by the time you get to the point where you can actually have impact or change, you don't necessarily want to, because you're
drained.
well, and you're happy with the status quo, right? You've worked very hard to get to this point. Why would I want to change things? And so that's a real challenge in times of instability like this. Because what it suggests is that the solutions, the ideas that are going to help us move out of this aren't necessarily going to come from the people we have in those leadership positions. They're going to come from the new bloods, the people who haven't been worn down over time, who haven't been socialized into the way that organization works. So what that suggests then, and this is a challenge, is that those people who are in leadership positions have to entice those new ideas up, and they have to be open to people who are not in leadership positions having ideas, having new ways of doing things, and trying to be willing to try and experiment and see what happens and learn from life. That paradox is a real challenge for leading organizations.
So we have in podcasts. The organization will grab I say something maybe for
There was a question in the back there. Just like we did get caught.
please.
As it is to choose the leadership, I think some amount of points affecting this result, which is decreases and decreases of this end. So what is the main factor that increases the result? Increases the result as a result of just many leadership. As a result of the leadership, what is the point that affecting this result? يعني شو شلون ان وصل رئيس الحوار للجلسات فكيف تختبر العوامل تأثر على الوصول إلى القيادة العوامل تؤثر إلى الوصول إلى القيادة What are the factors شنو العوامل اللي تأثر إلى الوصول إلى القيادة؟ نعم okay what are the factors that helps reaching to leadership? So what are the factors that makes a person to reach and become a leader?
It's a very good question. When I teach leadership to my MBA students, many of whom aren't quite to the level that they want to be inside the organization to really affect leadership. One of the things that we talk about is that anyone inside the organization can have influence, right? Influence is the basis of leadership, right? Effective leadership comes from being able to mobilize large groups of people to move in a certain direction. Well, one of the best ways to begin to move into a leadership situation is to demonstrate their influence, right? To start small, to interact with those around you and get them to start thinking differently, to get them to recognize new perspectives that they might be. The more that we are able to demonstrate leadership, the more confident we will be in our own leadership abilities, which will reflect on us well. But the more likely other people are to see us as leaders and to adopt to us as leaders and to come to us for new perspectives or advice for this. So one of the, there's nothing paradoxical about this, one of the best ways to become a leader is to act like a leader. Also, it is also the right to, even though you might not have that title or that position. Yes.
Other traits, how is that language affecting the emotion?
شلون
The environment.
The environment.
environment of talking and ها؟
Field.
ايه أقصد
How does it affect the leadership?
الانفايرمنت مثلا المؤسسة نفسها شلون يأثر على القيادة.
Yeah.
The environment that the person is in, let's say the administrator, military, organization, how does that environment affect that leader? It could be positive and negative.
Sure. Obviously, in order to be successful inside an organization, a leader has to understand the politics that go on inside your organization, the ways in which different people are connected, the motives that drive people. And so if a leader doesn't have a good understanding of that, of the way in which people work together, the way in which some things are valued and other things are not valued, that can be very challenging to the leader and actually inhibit the leader from doing what needs to be done. The more that you understand that, the more that you're able to empathize with the people that you're trying to lead, perhaps that can actually facilitate and make things easier.
Can we rephrase it or put it in one word? To understand the culture of the organization that you're in order to lead.
Yes.
I have actually just like, I know it's not a question. In many cases, sometimes you find, like, let's say, employees, they're not leaders, but they're in positions, let's say, midway position in an organization. And in that positions, they're really excelling. And then you start, let's say, the top managers get to see them outstanding in their positions. So they start choosing them to be leaders. While they're not leaders, they're more of a technical person. This really affects the organization. And it's so hard to get them back where they want, because they want to an upper stage. So how can you minimize that error?
Well, I think one of the reasons that happens is because people are moving into leadership positions for the wrong reasons.
Yes, different reasons. Let's say financial reasons maybe, or powerful reasons, or
You've done a great job on the technical aspects of this project. We're going to move you up so you can lead people. That might not be that person's strength.
Exactly.
Right? So oftentimes it's the way in which leadership decisions are made or promotion decisions are made. And the criteria that are used. Someone can be a great performer based upon the tasks that they're asked to do, but that doesn't mean that they can be good leaders.
Yes.
Right? So I think a lot of it, and this was part of my point about fostering leadership around you,
Yes.
right, is as a leader, when you begin to see someone who shows some potential, who shows the potential to lead others or be influential, give him that opportunity and see you might have someone there that you could promote and put in a position that would help you progress as well.
Do you agree that usually technical people have, let's say, low leadership skills, while leaders are different?
The usually is what bothers me about that.
What?
Well, because everyone is different. I know many people who are technical wizards,
Yes.
and they have the ability to attract other leaders, and therefore lead. I do know some people who are great technically, and they're not very good with people, and therefore it's just one is both.
So it's let's say that's a myth. We have the next question from the
Yes, thank you, Dr. Corley, for such enlightening and informative lectures. And so let us talk about our region, where it's pointing countries, as far as the high government stability is concerned. As you are aware that such concept of high instability is mainly caused by rentier-based management. I mean, most of our world countries and most of the decisions are taken mainly or derived mainly because of the rentier behavior. And rentier behavior is only one spread in natural resources, producing abundance. Now, from your long experience, how to neutralize the effect or frontier behaviors in making decisions, in making the right management, in neutralizing hyper instability. Thank you.
I purposely went out of my way now to talk about removing hyperinstability or neutralizing it, because much of what's leading to this hyperinstability is outside the control of any one leader, even outside the control of like any one organization. And so I think what our goal is to reduce the impacts of hyperinstability on the people that we're leading, on the group that we're responsible for. If we step up to the level of how can global leaders begin to act on the basis of this hyperinstability, that's a really big question that involves a lot of different areas. Obviously, we start getting into sustainability, we start getting into, like I said, some of the political instability that's going on. We start talking about healthcare, we start talking about poverty. There's lots of big issues. I think for most of us as leaders, especially working with inside an organization, what we have to focus on is what we might possibly be able to affect. And that's the people around us, the organization that we're in. And so for a lot of the students that I talk to, a lot of the executives that I work with, it's getting them to focus on everything that's going on out in the world that they can't impact, they can't have control over, but bring the focus back to that which you do have control over, or that which you can have an impact on. And so a lot of what I'll share with you tonight is getting leaders to think about that which is within their span of control, that they can actually begin to make elements that are being put in.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to have last question here.
Thank you. So you mentioned you talked a little bit about achieving the status quo.
Can you just it's closer or your voice and kind so we can hear the words?
Sure. So you talked a little bit about achieving the status quo. So I would know when is a good time to actually change the status quo, or in limit through in time also inefficiencies that go in register.
If I understand your question correctly, I could go back to the formula that I was talking about. So dissatisfaction, the status quo, desirability, the future state, cost of change. In general, it's easier to work on the desirability of the future state than it is dissatisfaction with the status quo. Although there's certainly a way of thinking about leadership that focuses on that dissatisfaction with the status quo. There's what I was in my consulting days, we used to talk about this idea of the burning platform. I don't know if anyone is familiar with it, but it's this idea of convince people that the platform they're standing on is on fire and they'll jump, right? They'll change. But I think what we're beginning to recognize is that has some dangers. There are unintended consequences that can come from convincing people that the status quo is so bad it has to change, without focusing on the desirability of the future state and reducing the cost of those changes, right? So if we can think about how this is going to affect someone's competence or their power, their rewards, or their identity, and we can work on that side of the equation, then we avoid some of the unintended consequences that come from convincing people everything is horrible and they need to jump and do something different. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Kevin, for your time. Thank you, K-Class, for your time over here. And yes, Thursday. Okay, if someone wants to leave, I don't want to hold you back. So you can ask any question, but when anyone wants to leave.
I can stick around.
Yes, yeah, but I don't want to make people hold. So we can stay here for as long as you want.
Thank you so much for the lecture. It was very helpful. Professor, my question is to take the opposite. When you have a leader who's well equipped to handling very difficult situations, very unpredictable ones, and the world has stabilized. For example, you mentioned COVID pandemic. We saw countries all over the world switch to technology-based applications. When would it be wise, since now for example, statements about incentives, when would it be wise to take a step back and realizing that we've just stabilized as a global, you should be focusing on other processes?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, I think your example is one we can work with, because all the ambiguity around what was COVID and what's the pandemic we have to deal with, that ambiguity did eventually clear up, right? And now we've moved much more into the uncertain, right? So what's the next variation and how impactful is it? We understand this well enough to know, we just don't know how many people are going to get sick and how sick they're going to get, right? And some even suggest we might be moving out of those bottom two quadrants into more of just the complexity and volatility. And you're right, I think in an ideal situation, we would be able to kind of stop, take stock of what's going on and say, okay, we put so much effort into working through that ambiguity. Now, how do we switch back to the type of leadership we need in a more uncertain state or a complex state? The problem is that there's so many other things that are happening in the world right now that it doesn't feel as if we've left that ambiguous state. So maybe you can think about a medical professional, a leader in a hospital or something like that, and their sole focus is just on healthcare situations and something like COVID. Certainly, it's a great time for them to stop, reassess what type of leadership we need, who do we need as our leaders, and now we're moving into some more stability. For many organizations, though, everything else going on in the world is continuing to impact them. And so there is still this sense of there's too much change going on. It's outside what we're used to and outside the resources we have to deal with it. So I think for many organizations, we can't answer your question yet, or we can't consider your question yet. But certainly when organizations get to the point when that ambiguity is gone and we're back into more what we expect, we have to shift the type of leadership that we're dealing with.
Thank you so much for coming over. مشكورين. أتمنى أن استفدتها، أتمنى أن نعطي عدد غالي من المعلومات لكم.
Thank you for your time.